Tonight, we're going to explore one of the most unsettling discoveries in the history of science. It is a discovery that was made by accident, confirmed by experiment after experiment across more than a century, and that still has no fully agreed explanation. A discovery so strange that Richard Feynman, one of the greatest physicists who ever lived, said that nobody understands quantum mechanics. Not because the math is too hard. The math works perfectly. But because what the math is describing about the nature of reality is something the human mind was not built to easily accept. The discovery is this: things do not have definite properties until they are observed, not just unmeasured, not just unknown, actually undecided, actually existing in multiple states simultaneously until the moment of observation, forces a single outcome. The act of looking at something does not reveal a reality that was already there. The act of looking at something creates the reality that is found. This is not a philosophical position. This is the empirically tested, mathematically precise, experimentally confirmed finding at the heart of quantum mechanics. The most successful scientific theory ever produced. Tested to precision, more accurate than measuring the distance between New York and Los Angeles to within the width of a human hair. It is not speculation, it is fact, stranger than any fiction. By the end of tonight, you are going to understand the double-slit experiment and why it disturbed the physicists who discovered it. You are going to understand what the wave function is and what it means for reality to exist in a superposition of states. You are going to understand Wheeler's delayed choice experiment, which showed that a photon can be made to retroactively decide whether it was a particle or a wave, after it has already completed its journey. You are going to understand Wigner's friend paradox, which asks whether two observers can experience different realities simultaneously. And you are going to understand what it means for observation to be not passive, but constitutive. Not a window onto reality, but the mechanism by which reality is made definite. There is a striking parallel between the measurement problem in quantum mechanics and the hard problem of consciousness that philosophers have been wrestling with since David Chalmers named it in 1995. The hard problem asks why there is subjective experience at all. Why is there something it is like to see red, to feel pain, to taste coffee? No amount of physical description of neural processes tells you why those processes are accompanied by experience. The description is third person. Experience is first person, and there is no bridge between them. The measurement problem in quantum mechanics asks why a single outcome occurs when we measure a quantum system. The wave function evolves smoothly and deterministically according to the Schrödinger equation, describing all possible outcomes simultaneously. But when a measurement occurs, only one outcome is experienced. The equation has nothing to say about this selection. There is no physical mechanism in the standard formalism that produces a single definite outcome from a superposition. And there is no agreed account of what distinguishes a measurement from a non-measurement. The parallel is this: both problems involve a gap between the physical description of a process and the subjective experience of an outcome. In the hard problem, the gap is between neural activity and consciousness. In the measurement problem, the gap is between the evolving wave function and the definite experienced result. Both gaps are inexplicable within the purely third-person objective framework of physical description. Both seem to require something about the first-person perspective, about what it is like to be an observer, that physics has not captured. Some physicists and philosophers have argued that these two mysteries are actually the same mystery, approached from different directions. The measurement problem is the hard problem of consciousness encountered from the physics side. The hard problem is the measurement problem encountered from the philosophy of mind side. Both are pointing at the same gap in our understanding. The gap between objective physical description and subjective first-person experience. If this is right, then solving the measurement problem might require understanding consciousness. And understanding consciousness might require understanding what happens in quantum measurement. Neither can be solved in isolation, because they are the same problem. The observer and the observed are not separate. The act of observation is not peripheral to physics. It is where physics meets mind, and where the objective and subjective dimensions of reality intersect. This is speculative. Most physicists hold these two problems apart and resist the suggestion that they are connected. But the resonance between them is striking enough that a small but serious community of researchers, including Penrose and Hameroff, with their orchestrated objective reduction theory, continue to explore the possibility that the mystery of quantum measurement and the mystery of conscious experience are different facets of a single deeper mystery about the nature of reality that we have not yet found the framework to articulate. Tonight we have explored that mystery from its physical side, the observer effect, the collapse of the wave function, the delayed choice experiment, Wigner's friend, the participatory universe. All of these are physics pointing toward the same gap, the same irreducible role of the observer in determining what is real. Whatever lies on the other side of that gap, it is the deepest question physics has ever opened, and it is one that no one, yet, has answered. The observer effect and the reality of quantum superposition are not merely philosophical curiosities. They have practical consequences that are currently being exploited in quantum computers. Devices that harness quantum superposition to perform computations that would be impossible for any classical computer. A classical computer processes information in bits, each of which is either 0 or 1. A quantum computer processes information in qubits, quantum bits that can exist in superpositions of 0 and 1 simultaneously. A single qubit in superposition is both 0 and 1 at the same time. 2 qubits in superposition represent all 4 possible combinations: 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, and 1, 1, simultaneously. 10 qubits in superposition represent all 1024 possible 10-bit strings simultaneously. This superposition allows a quantum computer to process exponentially more information simultaneously than a classical computer. For certain types of problems, quantum algorithms can solve in polynomial time problems that would require exponential time on any classical computer. Shor's algorithm, developed in 1994, can factor large numbers exponentially faster than any known classical algorithm, which would render current cryptographic systems obsolete. Grover's algorithm can search an unsorted database quadratically faster than any classical algorithm. The key is that quantum computation takes place in superposition. The quantum computer explores all possible computational paths simultaneously, using quantum interference to amplify the paths that lead to correct answers and suppress those that lead to wrong answers. The final measurement, the observation that collapses the superposition to a definite outcome, produces the answer that has been amplified by the interference. The observer effect is both the power and the challenge of quantum computing. Superposition enables exponential parallelism, but decoherence, caused by any interaction with the environment, destroys the superposition before the computation is complete. Building a practical quantum computer requires maintaining quantum coherence for long enough to complete the computation, while also correcting quantum errors that inevitably accumulate from residual. Decoherence. Google announced in 2019 that its Sycamore quantum processor had achieved quantum supremacy, performing in 200 seconds a calculation that would take the best classical supercomputer 10,000 years. IBM and others disputed the exact comparison, but the demonstration marked a milestone. Quantum computers are real devices that exploit quantum superposition to perform calculations beyond classical reach. What quantum computing makes concrete and practical is the reality of quantum superposition. When a qubit is in superposition, it is not secretly in one state or the other, with us not knowing which. It is genuinely in both states simultaneously. The computation takes place on all values, simultaneously. If superposition were merely ignorance about a classical hidden variable, quantum algorithms could not work as they do. The exponential speedup depends on the genuine reality of superposition, the same superposition that the double-slit experiment revealed, and the observer effect destroys. We have now traced the observer effect from its origins in the double-slit experiment through the collapse of wave functions, Bell's theorem, and quantum non-locality, Wheeler's delayed choice experiment, and the retroactive determination of the past, the quantum eraser and the erasure of history, Wigner's friend, and the possibility of observer-dependent realities, the participatory universe, quantum biology, decoherence, and quantum computing. What does all of this amount to? What is the universe at its most fundamental level? The honest answer is that we do not know. There is no single interpretation of quantum mechanics that has achieved universal acceptance. The Copenhagen interpretation, many worlds, relational quantum mechanics, cubism, Bohmian mechanics, objective collapse theories, they all account for the predictions of quantum mechanics, which are empirically the most accurate predictions in the history of science, and they describe radically different pictures of what reality is. What they agree on is that the classical picture of a universe made of definite objects with definite properties existing independently of observation is wrong. That picture is a very good approximation for everyday scales and everyday purposes. But at the quantum level, which is the fundamental level, the universe is not made of things in definite states. It is made of possibilities, superpositions, wave functions, probability amplitudes. The definite things of everyday experience emerge from this substrate of possibility through interaction, through measurement, through the acquisition of information, through what we call observation. Whether observation requires consciousness or merely information transfer, whether the wave function describes an objective reality or the beliefs of an agent, whether collapse is a real physical event or an artifact of the observer's perspective, whether the unobserved branches of the wave function are real or merely mathematical possibilities. These are open questions that the best minds in physics and philosophy have not resolved. But the non-negotiable core is this: the universe, at its most fundamental level, is not independent of observation. Properties of quantum systems do not have definite values until they are measured. The outcomes of measurements are not determined by hidden properties the systems had all along. The past history of a quantum system is not fixed until it is registered by an observation. The universe we inhabit is one in which the act of looking at things participates in determining what they are. You are not a passive observer of a universe that runs independently of your attention. You are, in some sense, that physics is still working out the precise details of, a participant in the construction of reality. Every observation you make, every photon that enters your eye and triggers a neural response, every interaction between your sensory systems and the external world, is an act of bringing some small piece of the universe into definite form. For much of the 20th century, quantum effects were considered relevant only to subatomic systems in carefully controlled laboratory conditions. Biological systems, warm, wet, and noisy, were thought to be too complex and too hot for quantum coherence to survive long enough to matter. The quantum world was a domain of the infinitesimally small and the isolated. Life, it was thought, operated entirely in the classical realm. This assumption has been substantially revised in the 21st century by a growing body of experimental evidence demonstrating quantum mechanical effects in living biological systems. The field of quantum biology has emerged as a serious scientific discipline, exploring quantum phenomena in processes as fundamental as photosynthesis, bird navigation, enzyme catalysis, and, possibly, olfaction. The most striking evidence for quantum effects in biology comes from photosynthesis, the process by which plants, algae, and some bacteria convert light energy into chemical energy. In 2007, Graham Fleming's group at the University of California, Berkeley, published measurements of the light harvesting complexes in green sulfur bacteria that showed quantum coherence persisting on timescales of several hundred femtoseconds, several hundred millionths of a billionth of a second, at room temperature. The energy absorbed from photons was being transferred through the light harvesting complex, not by the classical random walk that would be expected in a warm biological system, but by a quantum wave-like process. The significance is that quantum coherence allows the energy to explore multiple pathways simultaneously and find the most efficient route to the reaction center, where it is converted to chemical energy. The quantum superposition of pathways enables a kind of quantum parallel search that classical random diffusion cannot match. The efficiency of photosynthesis, which in some systems approaches 95%, may depend on this quantum mechanical process operating inside the warm, wet, apparently classical interior of a biological cell. The European robin and several other migratory birds navigate using a magnetic compass that appears to exploit quantum entanglement. The proposed mechanism, known as the radical pair mechanism, involves a cryptochrome protein in the bird's retina, in which a photon creates a pair of electrons in a quantum entangled state. The quantum state of this entangled pair is sensitive to the orientation of the Earth's magnetic field, and the bird's nervous system appears to read out this quantum information to determine which direction is north. Experiments have shown that this magnetic sense can be disrupted by oscillating magnetic fields at the frequencies that would affect a quantum radical pair, but not by the stronger fields that would disturb. Classical magnetic sensing. Enzyme catalysis, the acceleration of chemical reactions by biological proteins, may also exploit quantum tunneling, the quantum mechanical ability of particles to pass through energy barriers that they classically could not surmount. Enzymes that catalyze hydrogen transfer reactions show isotope effects that suggest the hydrogen is tunneling through the energy barrier rather than going over it, a purely quantum mechanical process. What quantum biology suggests is that life has evolved to exploit quantum mechanics. The observer effect, the relationship between quantum superposition and the acquisition of information, is not merely an abstract phenomenon relevant to laboratory experiments with isolated particles. It operates in the proteins and pigments and chemical processes of living cells. Life, at its most fundamental level, operates at the quantum interface between multiple superposed possibilities and definite classical outcomes. The most important concept for understanding why we do not see quantum superpositions in everyday life is decoherence. It is the process by which quantum systems lose their coherence, their ability to exhibit interference, through interactions with their environment. And it is the bridge between the quantum world of superpositions and wave functions and the classical world of definite objects in definite states. Any quantum system exists in a superposition of states only as long as its quantum coherence is maintained. Coherence requires that the different components of the superposition remain in a precise phase relationship with each other. If that phase relationship is disrupted, the superposition becomes a mixture of definite states and the quantum behavior disappears. The environment disrupts coherence by interacting with the quantum system. Every air molecule that scatters off a particle, every photon that is absorbed or emitted, every thermal vibration that couples to a quantum system carries away information about the system's quantum state. As this information leaks into the environment, the coherence is lost. The quantum system becomes entangled with its environment. And from the perspective of any observer who cannot track every degree of freedom in the environment, the quantum system appears to be in a definite classical state. The timescale for decoherence depends on the size of the system and the strength of its coupling to the environment. For subatomic particles in a vacuum, decoherence times can be very long. Quantum coherence can survive for seconds or even longer. For a grain of dust in air at room temperature, the decoherence time is on the order of 10 to the minus 36 seconds, immeasurably shorter than any timescale relevant to physics. For anything of macroscopic size, decoherence is instantaneous for all practical purposes. This is why we never see macroscopic objects in quantum superpositions. Not because superposition stops applying at large scales, but because any large object is constantly interacting with its environment, and every interaction destroys the coherence necessary for superposition to be observable. Decoherence also explains why the pointer states of measuring apparatuses, the states that encode measurement outcomes, are classical rather than quantum. The interaction between a measuring apparatus and the environment selects certain states, the pointer states, as stable against decoherence. These are the states that survive environmental interaction without becoming entangled with the environment in ways that would wash out the information. They are the states that correspond to definite classical outcomes of measurement. Decoherence is now accepted by essentially all physicists as the correct explanation of why we do not see quantum behavior at macroscopic scales. But it does not, by itself, solve the measurement problem. Decoherence explains why the quantum superposition of different outcomes becomes practically indistinguishable from a classical mixture. It does not explain why a single definite outcome is experienced rather than all outcomes equally. That last step, from a decohered mixture to a single experienced outcome, still requires either a collapse mechanism, an appeal to many worlds, or some other interpretive framework. If observation plays the role that quantum mechanics suggests it does, a question arises that is both scientific and philosophical in the deepest sense. What was the universe like before any observers existed, before life evolved on Earth? Before any complex physical systems capable of registering and recording information were present in the cosmos. For the first several 100,000 years after the Big Bang, the universe was a hot, dense plasma in which photons could not travel freely. There were no atoms, no molecules, no structures of any complexity, certainly no observers. When the plasma cooled enough for electrons and protons to combine into neutral hydrogen, the universe became transparent for the first time. and the photons that were released became the cosmic microwave background we detect today. Was the early universe in a definite quantum state during those hundreds of thousands of years? Or was it in a superposition of many possible states, with definite outcomes only being selected when something sufficiently observation-like occurred? And if so, what counts as observation-like in a universe containing only hydrogen plasma? The standard answer, which most practicing physicists accept without much philosophical anxiety, is that decoherence handles this. Even without conscious observers, quantum systems interact with each other, and these interactions constitute a form of measurement. The early universe was constantly performing measurements on itself. Particles scattering off each other, fields interacting. The quantum information of any given particle was constantly being entangled with and registered by the environment. This environmental entanglement constitutes a form of observation that suppresses quantum coherence and produces classical behavior, without requiring any conscious observer. On this view, the cosmos is full of observations happening all the time. Every photon absorbed by an atom is an observation. Every particle interaction is an observation. Consciousness is not required. The physical process of information transfer between systems is what matters. But this answer, while pragmatically satisfying, does not fully dissolve the conceptual problem. On the Copenhagen interpretation, there is still a question about whether collapse ever really happened before conscious observers arrived to establish a classical realm. Bohr himself was vague about this. On the many worlds interpretation, the pre-observer universe was in a vast superposition of possible histories, with no branching into definite outcomes, because no one was there to experience any particular branch. The cosmic history we reconstruct from our present observations is, on the delayed choice view, assembled by our current observations reaching backward through time. None of these pictures is fully satisfying, and none has achieved universal acceptance. The relationship between quantum mechanics, observers, and the very early universe is one of the most active areas of research in quantum gravity, quantum cosmology, and the foundations of physics. It is a question that touches the deepest questions about existence. What does it mean for something to be real? What came before the observers who could make it real? These are not idle philosophical questions. They are open scientific problems. Wheeler's participatory universe connects with a set of ideas in cosmology that are sometimes grouped under the heading of the anthropic principle. The anthropic principle, in its various forms, addresses the striking fact that the physical constants of the universe appear to be fine-tuned for the existence of complex structures, including life. The gravitational constant, the strength of the electromagnetic force, the mass of the electron, the energy density of the vacuum. All of these parameters have specific values that allow for stable atoms, long-lived stars, carbon chemistry, and ultimately, biology. Small changes to any of them would produce a universe in which complex structures cannot form. A slightly different value of the strong nuclear force and carbon cannot exist. A slightly different cosmological constant, and the universe either collapses immediately or expands so fast that galaxies never form. The standard anthropic response to this fine-tuning is selection bias. Of course, we observe a universe compatible with our existence, because we could not be here to observe any other kind. The apparent fine-tuning is explained by the fact that only fine-tuned universes are observed. This is the weak anthropic principle, and it is logically sound. But it says nothing about why there are any universes at all, or why any of them have the right parameters. Wheeler's participatory universe offers a different perspective. The universe required observers not just because observers are a convenient way to notice fine-tuning, but because observers are what makes the universe definite. A universe without observers might not be a universe with definite physical constants at all. It might be a superposition of all possible universes with all possible constants, a vast quantum multiverse of potential physicalities. The act of observation, the existence of physical systems complex enough to register and record information, collapses this superposition. It selects a branch of the universal wave function, and the branch selected is necessarily one that is compatible with the existence of observers, because only in those branches are there observers to do the selecting. This is a deeply speculative idea that most physicists hold at arm's length, but it captures something genuinely puzzling about the relationship between physical law, observers, and the existence of a universe with definite properties. The universe seems to require observers in a sense that goes beyond mere selection bias. It may require observers in the more fundamental sense that observers are what makes the universe's history definite rather than merely potential. The physicist André Linde has explored related ideas in the context of inflationary cosmology, suggesting that consciousness may play a fundamental role in quantum cosmology, not just as a passenger, but as a constitutive element of the very framework in which the universe evolves. These ideas remain at the frontier of speculation, but they reflect the genuine depth of the mystery that quantum mechanics has opened up about the relationship between mind and matter, observer and observed. Another interpretation that takes subjectivity seriously is called cubism, which stands for quantum Bayesianism, developed primarily by Christopher Fuchs, Rudiger Schack, and Carlton Caves. Cubism takes the most radical step of any mainstream interpretation. It says, quantum mechanics is not a description of the world at all. It is a normative framework for rational agents making decisions about their experiences. In cubism, the wave function is not a physical object or a description of physical states. It is an agent's personal probability assignment, a compact encoding of their beliefs about what experiences they will have when they perform certain actions. The Born rule, which gives probabilities from wave functions, is a normative constraint on rational belief updates rather than a physical law. When a cubist performs a measurement, the wave function collapse is not a physical event. It is a belief update. The agent had a probability distribution over possible outcomes. They got an outcome. They updated their probabilities accordingly. The collapse is Bayesian conditioning, entirely internal to the agent's epistemic state. Cubism is explicitly anti-realist about the wave function. It holds that there is no objective quantum state of the world. The wave function exists in the mind of the agent, not in the world. Different agents can have different wave functions for the same system, and this is not a problem. They have different information, so they have different probability assignments. This makes cubism immune to all the standard paradoxes of quantum mechanics. Schrödinger's cat poses no problem, because the cat's wave function is just an agent's probability assignment over outcomes, not a description of a cat in superposition. Wigner's friend poses no problem because Wigner and his friend are different agents with different information and different wave functions, neither of which is more real than the other. Bell's theorem poses no problem because the correlations between entangled particles are correlations between different agents' experiences, not evidence of non-local physical influences. The price of cubism is giving up on the project of understanding what the world is like independently of agents experiencing it. Physics in cubism, becomes a science of experience rather than a science of the world. What the world is in itself, beyond the experiences of agents, is beyond the reach of physics. Cubism is cheerfully agnostic about what exists beyond the phenomena. Fuchs, who has written extensively about cubism's philosophical implications, draws on the pragmatist tradition in American philosophy and on William James's radical empiricism. The universe is not a machine running according to laws that exist independently of any observer. The universe is, in some sense, co-created by the agents who inhabit it, and whose experiences are the primary subject matter of physics. Wheeler spent the last decades of his career developing and extending the philosophical implications of the delayed choice experiment. His conclusion was that the universe is not merely observed by conscious beings. It is brought into existence by them. Observation is not a window onto a pre-existing reality. It is the act by which reality is constituted. Wheeler coined the phrase "it from bit" to express this idea. Every particle, every field, every physical entity, every it, derives its existence from yes or no answers to binary questions put to nature by observers. The bits are the answers to questions. The its are the material reality that emerges from those answers. Matter and energy are secondary. Information is primary. This is shocking discovery number 6. Observers are not passengers in the universe. They are participants in its creation. The universe does not exist as a fully formed structure waiting to be discovered by conscious beings. It is assembled retroactively and progressively by the observations that participants make. Wheeler's participatory universe is deeply connected to the delayed choice result. The cosmic version of the delayed choice experiment, with photons from quasars billions of light years away, means that observations made today are participating in the history of a universe that began 13.8 billion years ago. The universe's history is not fixed independently of observation. It is a history that is being made, or at least made definite, by observers in the present. This does not mean, Wheeler insisted, that the universe did not exist before observers arrived, but it does mean that the universe before observers was not definite in the way the universe is after observers. It was a realm of potentiality, of quantum superposition, of multiple possible histories, overlapping and interfering. The emergence of observers, of any physical systems complex enough to register and record information, began the process of collapsing that superposition into a definite history. Wheeler described the universe as a self-excited circuit. The universe begins to exist, gives rise to observers, and observers participate in giving the universe its definite form. There is a loop between the origin of the universe and the existence of observers, a loop in which each is necessary for the other. Without observers, there is no definite universe. Without a universe, there are no observers. This is either the most profound insight in the history of physics or the most extravagant overinterpretation of quantum mechanics, depending on whom you ask. It is taken seriously by a significant number of physicists and philosophers of physics. It has not achieved consensus, but it captures something about the observer effect that no more conservative interpretation quite manages to articulate. The universe is not merely there. It is called into definiteness by the act of being looked at. The Copenhagen interpretation, with its collapse postulate and its refusal to say what is real between measurements, bothers many physicists. It seems to require a sharp and unmotivated distinction between the quantum system and the classical measuring apparatus. It invokes observation as a primitive, undefined concept. and it offers no mechanism for collapse. Hugh Everett III, a graduate student at Princeton in 1957, proposed a radical alternative. What if the wave function never collapses? What if the Schrödinger equation applies universally to everything, including measuring apparatuses and observers? What if superposition never ends, but only appears to end from the perspective of any individual observer? In Everett's many worlds interpretation, when a measurement occurs, the universe does not collapse to one outcome. Instead, it branches. All possible outcomes occur, each in its own branch of the universal wave function. The observer, who is also a quantum system, also branches. One version of the observer sees spin up, another version sees spin down. Both versions are equally real. From the inside of any branch, the observer experiences a single definite outcome. The apparent collapse is not a real physical process, but a feature of the observer's restricted perspective. The full wave function, from outside, contains all branches simultaneously. The randomness of quantum mechanics is explained as the experience of one branch not knowing which branch it is in. The many worlds interpretation solves the measurement problem elegantly. There is no collapse and no need for a special rule about when collapse occurs. The Schrödinger equation applies universally and always. The appearance of collapse is an artifact of the branching structure and the observer's inability to perceive other branches. The price is enormous. You have to accept that every quantum event that could have different outcomes results in a branching of the entire universe. Every radioactive atom that could decay or not decay branches the universe into one where it decayed and one where it did not. Every measurement creates new branches. There are an incomprehensibly vast number of parallel universes, each as real as this one. Many physicists, particularly those who take quantum mechanics most seriously as a fundamental description of reality, favor many worlds or some variant of it precisely because it takes the wave function seriously as a description of real physical states, without adding anything beyond the standard formalism. Quantum computing pioneer David Deutsch is perhaps the most prominent advocate. He argues that many worlds is the only interpretation that makes sense of the success of quantum computation, in which the manipulation of quantum superpositions harnesses the computing power of parallel branches simultaneously. But the many worlds interpretation has its own difficulties. The most serious is the probability problem. In a universe where all outcomes occur, what does it mean to say that one outcome has a higher probability than another? If both outcomes happen, in what sense is one more likely? Proponents have proposed answers based on a measure called the Born rule, derived from the structure of the wave function, but the justification is not universally accepted. The physicist Carlo Rovelli, one of the architects of loop quantum gravity, proposed an interpretation of quantum mechanics in 1996 that takes observer dependence even more seriously than Copenhagen. Relational quantum mechanics argues that quantum states are not properties of systems. They are properties of relations between systems. The central claim of relational quantum mechanics is that the wave function of a system does not describe something about that system in isolation. It describes that system relative to another system, the observer. There is no such thing as the absolute quantum state of a particle. There is only the quantum state of the particle relative to system A, the quantum state of the particle relative to system B, and so on. Different observers can have different and mutually inconsistent wave function descriptions of the same system, and there is no fact of the matter about which is correct. Both are correct relative to their respective frames. This is analogous to the relativity of simultaneity in special relativity. There is no absolute fact about whether two events are simultaneous. There is only whether they are simultaneous relative to one reference frame or another. Similarly, there is no absolute fact about the quantum state of a system. There is only the state relative to this or that observer. Rovelli's interpretation naturally accommodates Wigner's friend without contradiction. Wigner and his friend have different quantum state descriptions of the laboratory, and both are correct relative to their respective frames. There is no global observer-independent reality. There are only observer-relative realities, interacting and producing consistent experiences through quantum correlation. The relational interpretation also offers a different perspective on the observer effect. In Copenhagen, observation causes collapse of a real physical superposition. In relational quantum mechanics, observation does not change anything about the system in itself. It updates the relational description that the observer has of the system. The system has no state in itself, only states relative to observers. Observation is the creation of a relation, not the collapse of a wave. Rovelli's interpretation has attracted serious attention from physicists and philosophers, particularly because it aligns with what quantum mechanics actually computes and predicts, while making no dubious assumptions about collapse, many worlds, or the special role of consciousness. Its price is a radical relationalism about reality. There are no observer-independent facts. Observers and their relations to systems are the primitive elements of physics. The delayed choice experiment has an even more disturbing cousin called the quantum eraser experiment. It demonstrates that information about the past can be destroyed and that destroying it changes what the past was. The setup begins with the standard double-slit arrangement. When a detector is placed to determine which slit the particle passes through, the interference pattern disappears, just as we discussed. The particle behaves classically because the information about its path is available in the universe. But what if we then erase that information? What if, after the path information has been recorded by the detector, we arrange for that information to be destroyed before it reaches any permanent record? The quantum eraser experiment does exactly this, and the result is that the interference pattern comes back. This is shocking discovery number 4. What matters is not whether the measurement happened. What matters is whether the witch path information is available anywhere in the universe at the time of analysis. If the information is erased, as if the measurement never produced a permanent record, the quantum behavior is restored. The particle retroactively behaved as a wave rather than a particle. The delayed choice quantum eraser, proposed by Marlin Scully and Kai Druhl in 1982, and experimentally demonstrated by Yoon Ho Kim and colleagues in 1999, combines both elements. Pairs of entangled photons are created. One photon, called the signal photon, goes through the double slits. The other, called the idler photon, is used to potentially record witch path information. The experimenters can then choose to either preserve or erase the witch path information encoded in the idler photon, after the signal photon has already landed on the detection screen. When the witch path information is preserved, the signal photons that arrived at the screen form no interference pattern. When the witch path information is erased, the corresponding signal photons, subsets of those that already arrived, do form an interference pattern. The signal photons already landed on the screen before the decision was made about the idler photons. The pattern of signal photon arrivals on the screen, however, depends on what happens later to their entangled partners. The future choice about the idler photons retroactively sorts the signal photons into subsets that do or do not show interference. This result has been verified experimentally multiple times and is not controversial among physicists in the sense of its factual occurrence. What is controversial is how to interpret it. The Copenhagen interpretation says the wave function exists to predict observation outcomes, not to describe a reality between measurements. The outcome is exactly what quantum mechanics predicts, so there is no problem. But for anyone who thinks there should be a clear story about what was really happening during the photon's journey, the quantum eraser is deeply unsettling. Information is not a passive record of what happened. Information is constitutive of what happened. The history of a quantum event is not fixed when the event occurs. It is fixed when the information about the event becomes permanently and irrevocably registered. Until then, it is as if the event is still in superposition, still suspended between multiple possible histories. The measurement problem becomes even more acute when you consider what happens when multiple observers are involved. This is the domain of Wigner's friend, a thought experiment devised by the Nobel laureate Eugene Wigner in 1961. And it has become one of the most actively debated topics in quantum foundations in the past decade. The thought experiment is simple. Wigner's friend is a physicist sealed inside a laboratory. Inside the lab, the friend performs a measurement on a quantum system, say, measuring whether a particle has spin up or spin down. According to quantum mechanics, before the measurement, the particle is in superposition of spin up and spin down. When the friend measures it, the wave function collapses, and the friend gets a definite result. From the friend's perspective, this is straightforward. There was a superposition. They measured it. They got spin up. Done. But now consider Wigner, who is outside the sealed laboratory. For Wigner, the entire laboratory, including his friend, is a quantum system. Before Wigner opens the door and observes what happened inside, the laboratory is in a superposition of the state in which the particle had spin up and the friend observed spin up, and the state in which the particle had spin down and the friend observed spin down. From Wigner's perspective, the wave function of the laboratory has not yet collapsed. His friend is, in some quantum sense, in superposition. But the friend had a definite experience. The friend knows they measured spin-up. The friend is not in superposition from the friend's own perspective. So we have two observers with apparently inconsistent descriptions of the same physical situation. From inside the lab, the wave function collapsed when the friend measured. From outside the lab, the wave function has not yet collapsed. Which description is correct? Wigner himself resolved the paradox by concluding that consciousness must play a special role in collapse. A conscious observer's experience, the friend's definite knowledge of the measurement outcome, must constitute a real physical collapse that Wigner's quantum mechanical description misses. Consciousness, Wigner suggested, is what distinguishes genuine measurement from mere entanglement. Most physicists today do not accept Wigner's consciousness-based resolution, but the paradox it points to remains. In 2018 and 2020, physicists including Časlav Bruckner and collaborators developed extended versions of Wigner's friend that are experimentally testable. These involve quantum computers acting as the friends and show that, under certain conditions, the two observers, one inside and one outside, will make predictions that cannot both be consistent with a single shared classical reality. Experimental groups, including one led by Massimiliano Proietti at Heriot-Watt University, have performed experiments based on these proposals. Published in Science Advances in 2019. The results are consistent with the theoretical prediction that two observers with different reference frames can experience genuinely inconsistent realities. The findings suggest that if we take quantum mechanics seriously as a description of reality, we may have to abandon the assumption that there is a single observer, independent reality. This is shocking discovery number 5. Reality might be observer-dependent, not universal. Different observers, in different positions relative to a quantum system, might have equally valid but mutually inconsistent descriptions of what happened. There may be no single fact about which wave function has collapsed and which has not. Reality might be locally consistent for each observer, while globally inconsistent across observers. The non-locality revealed by Bell's theorem and the experiments that tested it is one of the most counterintuitive features of the quantum world. Two particles that have interacted and become entangled remain connected in a way that defies ordinary intuitions about space and separation, regardless of how far apart they travel. Imagine a pair of photons created together in a process that produces them with opposite polarizations. One photon is sent to a laboratory in Tokyo. The other is sent to a laboratory in New York. When the photon in Tokyo is measured and found to have vertical polarization, the photon in New York will instantly be found to have horizontal polarization if measured, regardless of the thousands of miles separating them. This is not because the photons carried this information with them when they separated. Bell's theorem rules that out. The photons did not have definite polarizations before measurement. They were in superposition of all possible polarizations simultaneously. When the Tokyo measurement forced one photon to adopt a definite polarization, the New York photon simultaneously adopted the corresponding one, instantaneously, without any signal passing between them. This seems to violate Einstein's special relativity, which prohibits signals from traveling faster than light. But the non-locality of quantum mechanics is not a signal in the usual sense. It cannot be used to transmit information faster than light. The experimenter in Tokyo cannot choose what result they will get when they measure their photon. The result is random. They get vertical polarization or horizontal polarization with equal probability. The fact that their result will be correlated with New York's result is only apparent after the two experimenters compare their data through ordinary communication that travels no faster than light. Nevertheless, the correlation is real and instantaneous. Something is connecting the two particles across space in a way that has no classical analog. The physicist David Bohm, who spent much of his career trying to understand what quantum mechanics implied about reality, described this as the undivided wholeness of the universe. The particles are not separate objects that happen to have correlated properties. They are parts of a single quantum system that extends across space, a system whose properties are genuinely non-local. Anton Zeilinger, one of the Nobel laureates whose work confirmed entanglement, has performed experiments in which entangled photons were separated by distances of over 100 kilometers, and their correlations still held. The non-locality does not weaken with distance. Whatever connection is operating between entangled particles does not fade as they move apart. It is as if space itself does not separate them in the relevant sense. This is the quantum world's deepest challenge to ordinary intuitions about reality. Objects are not isolated and independent. They do not have definite properties until they are measured. And the act of measuring one can instantaneously determine properties of another, arbitrarily far away. The universe is not a collection of separate things interacting through forces. It is a web of relationships in which observation and connection are fundamental. Of all the thought experiments that quantum mechanics has inspired, perhaps none is more vertiginous than the one John Archibald Wheeler proposed in 1978, and that has since been experimentally confirmed. Wheeler was one of the most imaginative physicists of the 20th century, the person who coined the terms black hole and wormhole. And his delayed choice experiment cuts to the deepest question raised by quantum mechanics. Is the past determined? The setup is a version of the double-slit experiment, but with a twist. A single photon is sent toward a beam splitter, a device that sends half the light one way and half another way. The photon, in quantum superposition, takes both paths simultaneously. The two paths are then brought back together at a second beam splitter that recombines them. Depending on the path lengths and the angle of the second beam splitter, the photon will always end up in one detector or the other, due to wave interference. Here is the key. The experimenter can choose, after the photon has already passed through the first beam splitter and committed to its journey, whether to insert the second beam splitter or to remove it. If the second beam splitter is inserted, the two paths recombine and the photon is detected in one of two detectors due to interference, a pattern that only arises if the photon traveled both paths simultaneously. If the second beam splitter is removed, the photon is detected in one of two detectors that each correspond to a single path, and the detection reveals which path the photon traveled, meaning it traveled only one path. Wheeler proposed making the decision of whether to insert or remove the second beam splitter after the photon had already passed through the first beam splitter. The photon is in flight. It has already completed the part of its journey where it would have had to choose, if it were a classical particle, which path to take. Only then is the experimenter's choice made. The result, confirmed in experiments first by Carol Alley and colleagues in 1984, and subsequently many times, is that the photon's past behavior is determined by the future choice. When the second beam splitter is inserted, the data shows that the photon took both paths. When it is removed, the data shows the photon took only one path. But the choice of which situation applies was made after the photon had already traversed the region where the path was determined. This is shocking discovery number 3. The past is not fixed until we observe it. The photon's history, whether it was a wave traveling both paths or a particle traveling one path, is not determined until the measurement choice is made, retroactively. The act of observation reaches backward in time and determines what the particle was doing in the past. Wheeler extended this thought experiment to a cosmic scale. He imagined a quasar billions of light years away, with a galaxy between it and Earth. The galaxy bends the quasar's light through gravitational lensing, splitting it into two possible paths around the galaxy. A photon from the quasar can reach Earth by traveling around the left side of the galaxy or the right side. The two paths are coherent and can interfere. If a telescope is set up to observe the interference between the two paths, the photon must have traveled both ways around the galaxy simultaneously. If the telescope is set up to detect which path the photon took, the photon traveled only one way. But the choice of telescope setup is made on Earth, now, and the photon made its journey billions of years ago. The choice of experimental setup being made today determines the history of a photon from billions of years ago. The photon's behavior across billions of years of light travel is not determined until an observer on Earth makes a decision now. Wheeler called the universe a participatory universe. Observation is not a passive act. Observation participates in constructing the past. The universe does not have a fully determined history. The history is assembled retroactively by acts of observation in the present. Albert Einstein could not accept the Copenhagen interpretation. He spent the last decades of his life arguing against it. His objection was not merely aesthetic. He believed quantum mechanics, as interpreted by Bohr, was fundamentally incomplete. That there must be hidden variables, additional quantities not described by the wave function that determine the definite outcomes of measurements in advance. The wave function would then be a description of our ignorance, not of a genuinely indefinite reality. Einstein's most famous objection came in the form of a question that he reportedly asked Abraham Pais, a physicist and his biographer, while walking in Princeton. Einstein stopped, turned to Pais, and asked whether he really believed that the moon exists only when someone looks at it. For Einstein, the answer was obviously no. The moon is there whether anyone looks at it or not. Reality must be independent of observation. In 1935, Einstein, together with Boris Podolsky and Nathan Rosen, published what became known as the EPR paper. It presented a thought experiment designed to show that quantum mechanics was incomplete. The argument involved two particles that interact and then move apart, becoming what quantum mechanics calls entangled. The quantum state of the two particles cannot be described independently. It is a single joint state. Einstein, Podolsky, and Rosen argued as follows. After the particles separate, you can measure the position of one particle and instantly know with certainty what the position of the other particle would be if measured. Or you can measure the momentum of one particle and instantly know the momentum of the other. But measuring position and measuring momentum give you different information about the other particle. It is as if the second particle can adopt either a definite position or a definite momentum depending on what you choose to measure about the first particle, even after they are far apart. Einstein concluded that the second particle must already have definite values of both position and momentum. The quantum mechanical description, which assigns indefinite values to both, must be incomplete. There must be hidden variables that quantum mechanics is not capturing. The particles are like gloves packed in separate boxes. When you open one box and find a left glove, you know instantly the other box contains a right glove. But the gloves had definite identities all along. The opening of the box revealed information. It did not create it. Bohr's response was nuanced and difficult. He argued that the properties of the second particle cannot be considered independently of the experimental setup used to measure the first particle. The two particles and the measuring apparatus form a single quantum system, and the question of the second particle's properties is not well defined independently of the measurement on the first. The position and momentum of the second particle are not hidden from us. They genuinely do not exist as definite values simultaneously. For nearly 30 years, the debate between Einstein's hidden variables position and Bohr's Copenhagen view was purely philosophical. There seemed no way to test which was right. Then, in 1964, a Northern Irish physicist named John Bell proved something extraordinary. John Bell was working at CERN when he discovered that the dispute between Einstein and Bohr was not just philosophical, it had experimental consequences. If Einstein was right, if quantum particles have definite hidden properties that determine measurement outcomes in advance, then those hidden properties must satisfy certain mathematical inequalities. These became known as Bell inequalities. If quantum mechanics was right, if particles genuinely have indefinite properties until measured, then the correlations between measurements on entangled particles would violate Bell inequalities. Bell's theorem is a mathematical proof. Given certain assumptions about locality, the principle that events at one location cannot instantly affect events at another, and about realism, the principle that physical systems have definite properties independently of observation. The correlations between measurement outcomes on entangled particles must satisfy specific bounds. Quantum mechanics predicts correlations that violate those bounds. Therefore, quantum mechanics cannot be both local and realistic. In 1972, John Clauser and Stuart Friedman performed the first experimental test of Bell's inequalities, using pairs of entangled photons. Their results violated the Bell inequalities, in agreement with quantum mechanics and in violation of local hidden variable theories. Einstein's hidden variables were ruled out, at least in their local form. The experiment was repeated and refined many times. Each iteration closed one or more potential loopholes in the experimental setup. In 1982, Alain Aspect conducted a series of experiments that addressed the most significant loophole, the so-called locality loophole. By ensuring that the measurement settings on the two ends of the experiment were chosen after the photons had already left their source, too late for any signal traveling at or below the speed of light to communicate the setting from one end to the other. Aspect's results still violated Bell inequalities. In 2015, Delft University performed a loophole-free Bell test, simultaneously closing both the locality loophole and the detection loophole. The results, published in Nature, definitively confirmed the violation of Bell inequalities. In 2022, Alain Aspect, John Clauser, and Anton Zeilinger received the Nobel Prize in Physics for their work on entangled photons and Bell inequality violations. The conclusion of these experiments is stark. At least one of Einstein's assumptions must be wrong. Either the world is non-local, meaning events at one location can have instantaneous effects on events at distant locations, or it is non-realistic, meaning physical systems do not have definite properties independently of observation, or both. Quantum mechanics is both non-local and non-realistic. The entangled particles do not have definite properties before measurement. When one is measured, the other instantly adopts corresponding properties, regardless of the distance separating them. This instantaneous connection, Einstein called it spooky action at a distance, is real. The experiments confirm it beyond any reasonable doubt. The moon, it turns out, is a more complicated case than Einstein's casual question suggested. At the scales of everyday life, quantum effects average out and classical reality emerges. The moon can be treated as having a definite location whether anyone looks at it or not. But at the quantum level, the level of the particles that make up the moon, the universe operates according to rules that have no definite states, without observation. Einstein was right that the theory was strange. He was wrong that it was incomplete. In 1935, Erwin Schrödinger, the same physicist who wrote the equation governing wave function evolution, devised a thought experiment that he intended as a reductio ad absurdum, a demonstration of what he saw as a deep flaw in the Copenhagen interpretation. The thought experiment has since become one of the most famous in all of science. Imagine a cat sealed inside a box. Inside the box with the cat is a radioactive atom, a detector, a hammer, and a flask of poison. If the atom decays, the detector triggers, the hammer smashes the flask, the poison is released, and the cat dies. If the atom does not decay, the cat lives. The atom is a quantum system. According to quantum mechanics, before we open the box and observe it, the atom exists in a superposition of decayed and not decayed states simultaneously. But the atom is connected, through the detector and hammer and poison, to the cat. If the atom is in superposition, what does that make the cat? By the logic of quantum mechanics applied without restriction, the cat should also be in superposition. The cat should simultaneously be alive and dead until the box is opened and the system is observed. Schrödinger found this conclusion absurd. A cat is a macroscopic classical object. It is either alive or dead. It cannot be in superposition in any meaningful sense. He intended the thought experiment to show that quantum mechanics, as interpreted by Bohr, must be incomplete. There must be something wrong with extending superposition from atoms to cats. Bohr's response was essentially that the thought experiment is poorly posed. The question of whether the cat is alive or dead has a definite answer precisely because the cat is a macroscopic, classical object that constitutes part of the measuring apparatus. The quantum classical boundary falls somewhere between the atom and the cat, even if we cannot say exactly where. But this answer is deeply unsatisfying. Nature does not draw a sharp boundary between quantum and classical. Everything is made of atoms. Everything obeys the same laws. If quantum superposition is real, why does it stop applying at some scale? And what scale exactly? 1 atom? 1,000? 1,000,000? A gram? A kilogram? A cat? Modern quantum physicists have a partial answer. Quantum coherence, the maintenance of superposition, is extraordinarily fragile. It is disrupted by any interaction with the environment. For a subatomic particle in a carefully isolated vacuum, superposition can persist. For a macroscopic object like a cat, which is constantly interacting with air molecules, photons, thermal radiation, and everything else in its environment, quantum coherence is destroyed almost instantaneously. This process is called decoherence. Decoherence explains why we never see macroscopic objects in superposition. It does not, however, fully resolve the measurement problem. Decoherence shows why macroscopic superpositions are unobservable in practice. But it does not tell us whether the superposition genuinely collapses or whether it merely becomes unmeasurably diffuse, spreading into the environment. And that question is at the heart of the deepest disagreements in quantum foundations. To understand what is actually collapsing when observation occurs, we need to understand what the wave function is. This is the mathematical object at the heart of quantum mechanics, and it describes something that has no analog in classical physics. In 1926, Erwin Schrödinger wrote down an equation that governs how quantum systems evolve over time. The Schrödinger equation is deterministic. It tells you with perfect precision how the wave function of a quantum system changes from moment to moment. There is no randomness in the equation itself. Given the wave function at any moment, you can calculate exactly what it will be at any future moment. In this sense, quantum mechanics is as deterministic as Newtonian mechanics. But the wave function does not describe the position of a particle, or its velocity, or any other property in the ordinary sense. It describes a probability amplitude. For every possible state the particle could be in, the wave function assigns a complex number. The square of that number gives the probability that, if you were to measure the particle, you would find it in that state. This means the wave function of an electron, for instance, is not a description of where the electron is. It is a description of where the electron might be found, spread out over all possible locations, with different probabilities assigned to each. An electron in an atom does not orbit the nucleus like a planet orbits the sun. Its wave function is smeared out around the nucleus in a probability cloud, with some regions more likely than others, but no single definite location. Before measurement, the electron exists at all of these possible locations simultaneously, not in any one of them. In all of them, in a superposition, weighted by the probability amplitudes the wave function assigns. The electron does not have a definite position. The definite position comes into existence at the moment of measurement. What makes this philosophically radical is that the wave function appears to be describing something real about the world, not just our ignorance about it. In classical physics, if I do not know where a ball is, the ball is still somewhere. It has a definite location that I happen not to know. The quantum case is different. The electron's indefinite position is not ignorance on our part. Experiments confirm that treating the electron as having a definite unknown position gives wrong predictions. Only the full wave function, with all its superposed possibilities, gives right predictions. The wave function evolves smoothly and deterministically according to the Schrödinger equation, as long as no measurement occurs. When a measurement occurs, the wave function collapses to a single definite value. The probability cloud contracts to a point. The electron is now somewhere specific. And the Schrödinger equation, which governs all other physical evolution, has nothing to say about how or why this collapse happens. This is the measurement problem. Quantum mechanics has two rules of evolution that appear to contradict each other. Smooth, continuous deterministic evolution, according to Schrödinger, when nothing is being measured. Sudden, discontinuous probabilistic collapse, when measurement occurs. And the theory provides no account of what distinguishes measurement from non-measurement, or of the mechanism by which collapse takes place. The first serious attempt to interpret what quantum mechanics was saying about reality came from the physicists who built the theory. Niels Bohr and Werner Heisenberg developed what became known as the Copenhagen interpretation in the late 1920s, and it is still the most widely taught interpretation of quantum mechanics today, though its philosophical implications are radical. Bohr's central insight was that quantum mechanics does not describe what things are. It describes what we observe. The wave function is not a description of physical reality. It is a tool for calculating the probabilities of measurement outcomes. The question of what is happening between measurements, what the particle is doing when we are not looking, is not a meaningful scientific question. Science can only talk about what is observed. The unobserved realm is outside the scope of physics. This position is sometimes called anti-realism about the quantum world. On the Copenhagen view, it is not that particles have definite properties that we happen not to know. It is that particles literally do not have definite properties until they are measured. The question, what position does this electron have right now when we are not measuring it, has no answer. Not because we are ignorant, because the question itself is empty. Heisenberg's uncertainty principle sits naturally in this framework. The uncertainty principle states that it is impossible to simultaneously know a particle's exact position and exact momentum. The more precisely you measure one, the less precisely you can know the other. This is often presented as a limitation of measurement technology. But Heisenberg's deeper point was that it is not a limitation of our instruments. Position and momentum simply do not both have definite values simultaneously. It is not that the particle has a precise position that our rough measuring instrument fails to determine. The particle does not have a precise position when its momentum is definite. and vice versa. The Copenhagen interpretation implies that the classical world we experience, the world of definite objects with definite properties in definite locations, emerges from the quantum world through the act of measurement. The measurement, the interaction of the quantum system with a measuring apparatus, is what brings classical reality into being from the fog of quantum possibilities. But this raises a deeply uncomfortable question that Bohr never fully answered. Where is the boundary between the quantum world and the classical measuring apparatus? The measuring apparatus is itself made of atoms, which obey quantum mechanics. Why does the measuring apparatus not also need to be measured to have definite properties? Why does the quantum superposition of the particle not extend to a superposition of the measuring apparatus and everything beyond it? This question leads directly to the most famous thought experiment in the history of physics. A cat, a radioactive atom, and a sealed box. Once physicists understood that individual particles were interfering with themselves through both slits simultaneously, the obvious next question was this: can we figure out which slit the particle actually went through? Not by guessing, but by placing a detector near one of the slits, a device that would record which slit the particle passed through without stopping it from continuing to the screen. The experiment was done with exquisite care. Scientists placed detectors next to the slits, detectors sensitive enough to register which path the particle took, without significantly altering the particle itself. Just observing, just looking, just recording the information. The interference pattern vanished. Not faded, not blurred, completely gone. When the detectors were active, the particles arriving at the screen formed exactly the two-band pattern you would expect from classical particles going through one slit or the other. When the detectors were turned off, the interference pattern returned. The act of observation, the simple fact that there was now information available in the universe about which path the particle took, destroyed the quantum behavior. The particle was no longer in superposition. It was no longer going through both slits at once. Because something in the experimental apparatus now knew which slit it had passed through, the particle behaved like a particle rather than a wave. This is shocking discovery number one. Observation collapses the wave function. Not because the detector physically deflected the particle, not because of any mechanical disturbance, but because information was created. The universe now had a fact about which path the particle took. And that fact, the mere existence of that information somewhere in the universe, was enough to eliminate the possibility of quantum interference. Feynman said this experiment contains the only mystery of quantum mechanics. Everything else, all the strangeness of the quantum world, is contained in this one result. A particle is in superposition when we do not know which path it took. The moment we obtain that knowledge, the superposition collapses. Think about what this means. Reality at the quantum level does not consist of definite states that we are simply unaware of. The particle does not secretly go through one slit or the other, and we just do not know which one. The particle genuinely has no definite trajectory until something measures it. The indefiniteness is real. The superposition is real. And it is destroyed by the acquisition of information. Now, here is a question that this result immediately raises. What is it about information that does this? Why does the existence of a record somewhere in the universe, even a record that no human ever looks at, force the particle to choose? The answer to that question is the measurement problem, and it is one of the deepest unsolved problems in physics. The year is 1801. A British physicist and polymath named Thomas Young is trying to settle a debate that had been running for over a century. Isaac Newton believed that light was made of particles, tiny corpuscles that traveled in straight lines. Christian Huygens believed that light was a wave, a disturbance propagating through a medium. The two theories made different predictions about certain experimental outcomes, and Young designed an experiment to decide between them. Young's setup was elegant and simple. He took a light source and directed it at a barrier with two narrow slits cut into it. Behind the barrier, he placed a screen to catch the light that passed through. The question was what pattern would appear on the screen. If Newton was right, and light was made of particles, the prediction was clear. Particles traveling in straight lines would pass through whichever slit they happened to be aimed at. The screen would show two bright bands of light, one behind each slit, corresponding to the two streams of particles that made it through. Two slits, two bright bands. Simple. But that is not what Young found. Instead of two bright bands, the screen showed a series of alternating bright and dark stripes extending across its surface. Many stripes, not two. The dark regions between the bright stripes showed places where the light had somehow cancelled itself out. This is the signature of wave interference, not particle behavior. Think about waves on water. When two waves meet, their effects combine. Where the crest of one wave meets the crest of another, the waves add together, and you get a bigger wave. Where the crest of one wave meets the trough of another, they cancel each other out, and the water goes flat. Young's light was doing exactly this. The light passing through each slit was spreading out as a wave, and the two sets of waves were interfering with each other, adding in some places and cancelling in others, creating the bright and dark stripes. Young's experiment was considered strong evidence that Newton was wrong and Huygens was right. Light was a wave. The interference pattern was its unmistakable signature. Physicists made enormous progress. Maxwell unified electricity and magnetism and showed light was an electromagnetic wave. Then, in 1905, Einstein showed that light also came in discrete packets of energy called photons. Light was both a wave and a particle. Somehow, this was the beginning of quantum mechanics. And then physicists decided to revisit the double-slit experiment with individual particles. Not a continuous beam of light, but single photons sent one at a time. This is where things became deeply strange. When single photons are sent through the double-slit apparatus one at a time, they arrive at the screen as individual dots. Each photon makes a single mark, just like a particle would. In the short term, sending a few photons through, the marks appear random. There is no obvious pattern. But as more and more photons arrive, a pattern begins to emerge from the accumulated dots. The pattern is an interference pattern, the same alternating bright and dark stripes that Young found with a continuous beam of light. Each individual photon lands as a particle. The collection of particles builds up a wave interference pattern. This should be impossible. A single photon going through the apparatus at a time cannot interfere with another photon. There is no other photon there at the same time to interfere with. And yet the photon is somehow behaving as if it went through both slits simultaneously, interfered with itself as a wave, and then arrived at the screen as a particle at a position determined by that self-interference. The photon is in superposition. It does not take one path. It takes both paths at once. It is a wave of probability spreading through both slits simultaneously, interfering with itself, and only becoming a definite particle at the moment it hits the screen. The question of which path it took has no answer until the moment of arrival. This is the beginning of the observer effect, and it gets stranger from here. Before we can understand the observer effect, we have to be precise about what observation means in quantum mechanics, because it does not mean what it means in ordinary life. In ordinary life, observation is passive. You watch a bird fly across the sky, and the bird flies regardless of whether you are watching. Your watching does not change the bird's trajectory. You are a passive receiver of information about events that happen independently of your attention. In quantum mechanics, observation means something different and far more radical. It means interaction. It means that some physical process has occurred that carries information about the system being observed. When we say that observing a particle collapses its wave function, we do not necessarily mean that a conscious being looked at it. We mean that the particle interacted with something in a way that left a record. That record is the observation. A photon hitting a detector is an observation. A particle leaving a track in a cloud chamber is an observation. An electron being deflected by a magnetic field in a way that encodes information about where it was is an observation. The common thread is information. If the interaction produces information about the quantum system, it counts as a measurement. And measurements, in quantum mechanics, change things. This distinction matters because it means the observer effect is not just about conscious observers, it is about information. It is about whether the universe has access to a definite fact about the state of a quantum system. When there is no such fact available anywhere in the universe, the system exists in superposition. When such a fact becomes available, through any physical interaction that encodes the relevant information, the superposition collapses. But here is where it gets interesting. The question of what counts as sufficient interaction to constitute an observation, what exactly causes superposition to collapse, is one of the deepest and most contested questions in the foundations of physics. Different physicists answer it differently, and those different answers imply radically different pictures of what reality is and what role observers play in it. We will explore all of them tonight. But first, we have to go back to the experiment that started everything. Before we get started, if you love exploring the depths of space and the deepest mysteries of physics as much as we do, take a second to like the video or subscribe. It is a simple action, but it helps this channel reach more curious minds like yours. Now let's begin. And tonight, when you close your eyes, when your attention withdraws from the world, remember what physics has discovered about what happens to the parts of the universe you are no longer observing. The wave function is reforming. The probabilities are spreading. Reality, according to the most successful theory we have ever built, is waiting for someone to look. Tonight, we explored one of the most extraordinary discoveries in the history of human knowledge. A discovery that was made by physicists trying to understand the behavior of light and electrons, and that turned out to say something profound about the nature of reality itself. We saw how the double-slit experiment revealed that particles exist in superpositions of multiple states simultaneously, taking multiple paths at once, until the moment of measurement forces a single outcome. We saw how the act of placing a detector near the slits, the creation of information about which path the particle took, was enough to destroy the quantum behavior, not through any mechanical disturbance, but through the mere existence of that information somewhere in the universe. We saw how Bell's theorem and decades of experiments proved that quantum particles do not carry hidden properties that determine their behavior in advance. The indeterminacy is real. The particles genuinely do not have definite properties until they are measured. Einstein was wrong, and the universe really is as strange as Bohr insisted. We saw how Wheeler's delayed choice experiment showed that the past behavior of a particle is not fixed until an observation selects it, and that this principle extends to photons that have been traveling through the universe for billions of years. The cosmic history we reconstruct from our observations is assembled, made definite, by the act of looking. We saw how the quantum eraser demonstrated that information about the past can be erasing, and that erasing it changes what the past was. We saw how Wigner's friend suggests that different observers may have different and mutually inconsistent realities. And we saw how Wheeler's participatory universe proposes that observers are not passengers in the cosmos, but participants in its creation. And now, as you lie in the dark, as your eyes close and your attention withdraws from the room around you, from the objects and surfaces and the faint sounds of the night, consider what quantum mechanics has told us about this moment. The parts of the universe you are no longer observing are returning to superposition. Slowly, as attention withdraws, as the coupling between your sensory systems and the environment diminishes, the definite classical world of your waking attention gives way to quantum fog. The photons that would have carried information about the positions of objects are no longer being registered. The interactions that would have constituted measurements are no longer occurring. The wave functions are spreading. This is not metaphor. This is the implication of the physics we have explored tonight. Every observation you make, every photon your eye absorbs, every interaction between your nervous system and the world collapses some small piece of the quantum superposition into classical definiteness. When you stop observing, that definiteness relaxes. The probability clouds reform. The universe becomes, in the regions you are no longer attending to, a little less definite. During sleep, your brain is not processing external sensory information in the way it does when you are awake. The stream of observations that makes the world definite for you has slowed to a trickle. And according to what quantum mechanics has shown us about the relationship between observation and reality, what this means for the universe in the vicinity of your temporarily unobservant mind is something that no interpretation of quantum mechanics has fully agreed on. But here is what we know. When you wake tomorrow, when your eyes open and your senses begin again to register the world, the wave function will collapse again. The room will be definite. The objects will be in positions. The light will be hitting surfaces and reflecting into your retinas and triggering neural cascades that constitute the experience of a classical world. Your observation will reassemble the definiteness of reality, just as it does every morning, just as it has done every day of your life. The universe is patient. It waits in superposition for the observers to return. It exists, as the physicists and philosophers who have thought hardest about quantum mechanics have concluded, in a form that is more like a vast field of potential than a collection of definite things. The definiteness, the sharp-edged classical reality of tables and chairs and stars and planets, emerges in the presence of observation and returns to potentiality in its absence. You are, in a way that is not mystical but genuinely scientific, a participant in the reality of the universe. Not because your consciousness is magic, but because you are a physical system complex enough to register information. And the registration of information is what quantum mechanics has shown to be constitutive of the definite world. Every observation you have ever made, every photon that has ever entered your eye, every sensation that has ever been registered by your nervous system, has participated in making some small piece of the universe more real than it would have been otherwise. This is what Thomas Young's light experiment discovered, without knowing what it had found, what Bohr and Heisenberg articulated and Einstein refused to accept, what Bell proved mathematically and Aspect confirmed experimentally, what Wheeler generalized into the principle of the participatory universe. The act of looking at the universe is part of how the universe becomes real. Tonight, the wave function reforms in the space around you. The probability amplitudes spread through the room, through the walls, across the city and the darkness beyond it, into the sky above, and the vast cosmic distance between here and the stars. Everywhere you are not observing, the universe is dissolving its definiteness and returning to the soft quantum fog from which it emerges when attention arrives. It will still be there tomorrow. The universe is not going anywhere. The superpositions are not dangerous. The wave functions spreading through the unobserved dark are not hostile, just uncommitted, just potential, just waiting. And when you wake and look again, they will collapse again into the familiar world of definite things. You have now spent tonight with the deepest mystery of modern physics. You have sat with the double-slit experiment and felt its strangeness. You have followed Bell's theorem and understood why Einstein's comfortable picture of hidden variables was wrong. You have traveled with Wheeler's photons across billions of light years and understood how the past is assembled by the present act of looking. You have sat with Wigner's friend and contemplated the possibility that different observers inhabit different realities. The universe is stranger than you were taught. It is stranger than common sense allows. It is stranger than the classical picture that works so well for Newton and Galileo, and that still works well for engineers and architects and pilots. But at the level where physics becomes most fundamental, at the scale of quantum events where the fabric of reality is most directly legible, the universe is a place where observation matters in ways that no classical physics could have anticipated. That is either the most unsettling fact about reality or the most intimate. Either the universe is fundamentally unknowable until it is looked at, which is vertiginous, or the universe needs you in a way that makes your existence genuinely cosmically significant, which is the opposite. Possibly it is both at once. Possibly that is where the truth lives, in the place where those two feelings meet. Close your eyes. Let the observations stop for a while. Let the wave functions spread. Let the universe be uncertain in the rooms you are no longer watching. The definite world will be here when you return to it. It always is. And when you look again tomorrow, you will participate, as you always do, in calling it into being. Sleep well.